Okay, so in this video, we are going to discuss three very important aspects of compression. And those aspects are threshold, ratio, and gain reduction. Threshold, ratio, and gain reduction. And you'll understand what all of these terms mean by the end of this video. And first off, let me show you the song that I'm going to be using to demonstrate everything in this mix. Let me grab my headphones here. And this is actually the vocal take that I used or that I recorded in module 2 when I was recording the vocal. This is like just what ended up being a scratch take because I used a song that is already released on Spotify. This is my song Satellite. It's the ambient version. AZAP is my artist name, by the way, if you're curious, AZAP. This is my song Satellite. And in module 2, when I was walking you through how to record the vocals, this is the vocal take that I recorded in to kind of demonstrate it. So I ended up, just because it's a very easy session that doesn't have a bunch of clutter, I decided to go ahead and use that as the demonstration window, if you will. So here's what it sounds like, and then let's dive into the compression. Spotlight, show me the way, 'cause I'm losing both my headlights. So that is where we're starting from. Now, I do have just a couple effects on this vocal because I want to eliminate a couple distractions, and I also want to, I did add a bit of reverb as well so that the vocal feels somewhat like it's mixed, like there's some effects on it. That way it's not a completely dry vocal when we're adding the compression to it, okay? So I just added a bit of tuning. That way you're not distracted with some of the notes that I definitely didn't hit perfectly, and then just a tiny bit of EQ, a bit of de-essing as well for the exact same reason so that your ears don't get distracted with those S's or T's popping through, and a bit of reverb at the end. So now let's go ahead and let's add a compressor to this. Now, I'm going to start with a stock basic compressor like this. So this is Studio One's stock compressor. Every DAW out there, and yours has this, it has a stock compressor that kind of looks like this. And what I mean is that it probably has all of these same knobs, which are threshold, right? Ratio, attack, release, makeup gain, or it might be gain or output gain. And then you have the mix knob. Most compressors have a mix knob if you want to go for a more parallel effect, but that's not really the point of this video. What we are going to focus on is threshold right here, the ratio, and then the gain reduction, which is going to happen here, but we'll get into that. Now, I do want to mention that we are going to discuss in a couple videos from now the difference between this type of basic stock compressor versus the more analog modeled plugins like the LA2A plugin or the 1176 compressor plugin. A lot of DAWs and a lot of different companies have their own versions of those compressors that are based on the old analog physical compressor that's been used for decades. And so those have a certain character to them, a certain color about them that can be very, very pleasing to the ears. And so I love using those types of compressors, and we will get into those. But the reason that I'm not starting with those other types of compressors is because those are actually often more minimalistic, because they're less knobs to turn. Often those compressor plugins like the LA2A, for example, actually doesn't even have attack and release. That is already set in stone. It's like a preset. Same goes for the 1176 style compressor. There are just less knobs, and so it's more of a preset compressor plugin. And so because of that, I just think it makes sense for you to understand what a compressor does. You understand all of the knobs on a basic level, but then it'll allow you to, because you understand the concepts, you can then use any other types of compressors you might want to add, and you can adjust and adapt from there. But I think this is just the best window through which to look at compression as a starting point anyway. So let's now dive into threshold. So that is the first parameter that I want to show you here. And threshold is a very important concept to understand. So this is the default setting of this compressor. Right now, the threshold is at -10 dB. I'm going to hit play, And let's see if it is doing any compression on this vocal.
Show me the way, cause I'm losing both my headlights.
I'll give you the answer. There is no compression happening. And that is because the threshold is not set low enough to compress anything. You can think of a threshold. So let me give you a real physical example of what a threshold is. So imagine this is a threshold. It's like a line, a threshold. And then you have the volume of the song, or in this case, the vocal. It's bouncing up and down, right? Sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's quieter. It's bouncing around a little bit. The threshold determines whether or not the compressor is activated. So with where it is now, the threshold is not turned low enough, and so it's not actually turning anything down. Remember what I said in the first video? That compression is basically, it's a volume knob. It turns things down. And so a threshold sets the threshold for, okay, as soon as the volume level goes above it, that's when it activates. So listen to what happens when I turn this threshold down. You're going to start to see and hear some compression happening. And you'll see this yellow bar right here activate once I start to turn this threshold down. Here we go.
All the coastlines are pulling me in. Now I'm magnetized from both
See,
sides.
here's this yellow line right here. That's the gain reduction.
I'm lost boy, out of place. I walk in a blurred line.
Even all the way down at minus 26 here on this threshold, that threshold is not meeting the vocal level. So it's not affecting the sound at all. Now, this is an important aspect of threshold and compression that you really do need to understand. And that is, it's not like compression is always compressing your sound. Compression only compresses the track when the sound or the volume of that sound goes above the threshold. So it's not like your vocal is always, or it's not like the compressor is always squashing and hitting the vocal. Instead, it only activates when the volume of the track rises above the threshold that you've set. So when I lower the threshold like this, all of a sudden, now we're getting into the area where it starts to shoot down the volume. That is what a compressor does. It turns down the volume, as we've already discussed. So that's the threshold. You turn down the threshold until it starts to compress the vocal. And then it's just a matter of how much of the vocal you want compressed, right? And this will take time for you to get comfortable with, get used to, and really start to get a feel for it. But I would say as a starting point, you want the compression to activate very slightly on the quieter parts of the vocal, and then on the loudest parts where the volume shoots way past the threshold, you might want the gain reduction or the amount of compression to be around perhaps -5, -6 on the very loudest parts. Now, even that's just a baseline to start from. There aren't exact rules here, but I do want to give you a baseline so that you have a bit of an understanding of where the ballpark is to get you started. So, because here, let's come into the chorus here.
Flickering like my satellite.
That's actually a great example. See, here we have -3, -6, -9, -12, right? And on the quieter notes, it was barely compressing, but on the louder part,
Flickering like my
on the word light, flickering light, when I said light, it compressed it at like -6.
satellite.
So do you notice what is happening here? We are turning down the volume of the loud parts. Whenever the volume of this vocal is very low, there's no compression. So it is only being activated. It's only turning down the volume of this vocal when the volume crosses the threshold that we've set over here. Now, here's an important point before we move on to ratio, and that is what we are doing is we are turning down those loud parts, right? So then what we can do, and this is the power of compression. So if the loudest part of the vocal is here, if the quietest part is here, and then because we set the threshold perhaps here, we're shooting down those loud parts. So now what do we have? The loudest part is no longer here, it's now here. But the quietest part is still the same. This hasn't been touched by the compressor. Now the overall volume of the vocal is less than it was. But here's the magic. Now all you need to do is use a little makeup gain or output gain and whoop, raise the overall volume of that vocal. So here is exactly what that looks like. So if we come over here, we're compressing this now, right?
Like my satellite.
So here's without it.
Or maybe
It's louder now, right?
maybe she's a thorn in my side, my kryptonite.
So you notice that the sound gets quieter. We're losing volume. Well, that's not good. We don't want that. Well, here's the magic. This little makeup gain knob over here.
I don't know how to fight this, 'cause I'm usually all in, but so indecisive.
Now, I am compressing this a bit. I'm really pushing this compressor a bit, but I am doing that on purpose. That way you can really get a feel for what compression is doing. And did you see what we did there? So we are adding now, after it goes through all of the knobs, all the parameters, it's shaping the sound the way that we've set it here with specifically the threshold. But because it turned it down, we are using the makeup gain to turn everything back up. Again, quietest part, loudest part, that's how it started. We put the threshold maybe here, and that shoots down the loud peaks. So now it's does this, and when you use the makeup gain again, it just raises the overall volume. So now, because of that, the quietest parts are no longer here. The quietest parts are now made louder. And then the loudest parts of the vocal are much closer in volume to the quietest parts. And that is the beauty of compression, specifically for vocals, because vocals are so problematic when it comes to dynamics. I mean, there are very few singers that you'll bring into the studio that can truly be very tight with the volume level. It's just going to happen that you're going to have loud notes and quiet notes and loud notes. And it's so dynamic. And so we need tools like compression to tame it, to balance that out so that the difference between the quietest part and the loudest part is less. So it goes boop, and then we can raise the overall volume so that we have a more consistent sound. And that is how we get that consistent, in your face, up front. You hear it all the time. It's always there. That quality comes from lowering the threshold, getting that compression activated, and then using the makeup gain or the output gain to compensate for the volume that we've just lost. Okay? So that was a bit of an extended version of using the threshold and what that means for compression on your vocals. Now, just a couple quick things. These are going to be super quick because there's just not that much to get into. Ratio is kind of an extension of the threshold. So the threshold, again, right? We have the threshold, any volume that goes above it, it'll shoot it down, it'll turn it down. Well, the ratio basically is the strength level of that action of turning it down. So imagine the threshold as a hammer, right? Just bop, it turns down the volume. So the volume goes up here and it bop, it hits it, turns down the volume. If the threshold is a hammer, the ratio is the strength or the force of the hammer. So with a very high ratio like this, like 20-1, that hammer is flying down, it's smashing down. With a lighter ratio, like 1.5 or 2-1, it's more of a light touch. Now, it's still turning everything down at the same time. It's just a matter of force, of how aggressive it is. And I bring this up because you might not know this. Ratio, if you've ever used a limiter, that a typical ratio on a limiter plugin is 20-1. And limiters are usually used on, the master outputs where you will take the master and run the entire song through. And in order to make sure that it doesn't clip, you'll throw a limiter on there, which is a very, very aggressive form of compression. Now, generally, we don't want to do that with our vocals, and we want to keep the ratio closer to 2, 3, or 4-1. Okay, but just so you can get a feel for it and so you can see what that looks like and what it sounds like, here is what it sounds like if we crank the ratio.
Like my satellite, or maybe.
Do you see how it went all the way down to -12 on this gain reduction?
Maybe she's a thorn in my side, my kryptonite. I don't know how to fight this, 'cause I'm usually all in, not so indecisive.
So there you go. Ratio is a hammer. It's just a matter of if the number is lower, like 2 to 1, it's more of a lighter touch of when the sound crosses the threshold, it'll shoot down the volume in a more smooth way, versus if it is a higher ratio, it's more of a forceful hammer that really shoots it down in an aggressive way. Okay, so that is ratio. And then finally, and I don't even really need to get into this because I've already talked about it, which is gain reduction and output gain or makeup gain. Now, gain reduction is this meter right here, this little yellow bar.
Yeah, I'm lost,
right
boy,
here.
out of place.
And that is again controlled by where the threshold is, and also in part where the ratio is. But it all starts with the threshold, right? Because if we again bring this, if the threshold is too high, then none of the volume, none of the track, the volume level isn't reaching the threshold, so there's no compression happening. So if we bring this down,
see, there's a lost girl,
and if we go all the way, then it squashes it too much. But then
did I just think twice?
Something like that.
Flickering like my satellite, my satellite.
So there we're hovering about at -3 is about the average for the compression that is happening. And that is a great place to start, especially because I'm a huge fan of stacking compressors. So it's very rare that, especially on a vocal, that I will only use one compressor. I will spread out the compression that is happening. And so I'll start with a compressor, perhaps like this, and then I will stack on a couple other compressors as well, and I'll add them to the chain as I go. So there you go. That is an explanation of threshold, of ratio, and gain reduction, as well as makeup gain or output gain. And so I'm hoping that this is all making sense to you. It is really powerful stuff. Compression is such a powerful tool that if you can just become competent at using it, it is going to serve you so well in all of the songs that you make in the future. Okay, so I really hope you found this helpful. Now let's move on to attack and release in the next video. See you there.